Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support, and I'd like to say thank you to F. Raboid for joining the Patreon and Ignacio for upping your pledge. Thank you so much, guys. Every little bit is a huge help. If you want to join the Patreon and support the show, then go check out japankyo.com/Patreon. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. Just a quick note here at the top of the show. Most of the conversation that you're going to get to hear today is going to focus on a story that involves sexual assault. So if you don't want to hear that, totally understandable. Come back next time, because my guest today is Allison Markin Powell. She's a literary translator, and I wanted to talk to her also about translating Japanese fiction. So what I did was we focused on that story in this first part of the episode, and then I am going to release the second part of our conversation as a different episode. And in that part, we're not going to talk about the story that this part focuses on. We're just going to be talking about Japanese fiction and translating it, and some of the challenges and some of the interesting aspects of her work, how she got into translation as well. It's a fun conversation, so very different in tone from this first part. So I think it's very easy to understand why I wanted to split them up. So if you don't want to stick around for this episode, fine, come back next time, because it'll be nice and fun and about something totally different. But for those of you who are sticking around, well, let me give you a few little details before we get into the conversation. So, like I said, my guest is Allison Markin Powell. She's a literary translator, and she's translated the works of authors such as Dazai Osamu, Kawakami Hiromi, and many others. The latest book that she worked on that just got published is called Black Box: The Memoir that Sparked Japan's Me Too movement. It just came out in July of 2021, and it's a translation of a book by Shiori Ito. I'm sure many of you recognize the name if you have kept up with the news at all in Japan from around, let's say, I guess 2017 onwards, because that is when people came to learn of Shiori Ito in the context of this story, at least. So, but for any of you who are not familiar with Shiori, let me give you just a little bit of background. Not too much, because Allison is going to explain more. But Shiori is a journalist and filmmaker who in 2015 was allegedly raped by Noriyuki Yamaguchi, a prominent TV personality, reporter, writer in Japan. And he wrote a book about Shinzo Abe. He seems to have some connections with him. And note about that allegedly thing, Noriyuki Yamaguchi was never convicted in a court of law. And so that's why, we have to say allegedly. But the story is that in 2015, she was raped by him. And basically, the Japanese legal system failed her. And in 2017, she held a press conference to talk about this entire ordeal. And, it made global headlines, and Shiori became a prominent figure almost overnight, I guess you would say. But I mean, some people, of course, reacted extremely negatively and aggressively towards her. But many people have also recognized her. For example, in 2020, she was named one of the most influential people by Time magazine. So Shiori wrote down her experiences, her experiences during the incident and what she remembers, and everything that happened afterwards, and the lead up to the press conference and what happened after that as well. And Allison translated this into the book. Again, it's called Black Box: The Memoir that Sparked Japan's Me Too movement. If you would like to pick up a copy and support the publisher and Shiori and Allison, and also support the show if you enjoy what I'm doing, you can use an Amazon affiliate link, japankyo.com/Amazon, link in the show notes. Of course, you don't have to. You can just pick up the book, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can just go ahead and pick it up. So I won't say anything more here, because we are going to say it in the conversation, and I don't want to repeat myself. So let's just get into it. Here is my conversation with Allison Markin Powell.
The next stop is Japan Station. attention. The doors on the right side will open.
I was watching that video. I think it was Words Without Borders, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
and,
that sounds like what it was.
Yes. And you were talking a little bit about your study abroad experience and one particular experience that you had during that time. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your time studying abroad and that experience that I'm alluding to.
Yes, sure. I'm happy to. I've actually been thinking about that study abroad homestay more recently when I was a sophomore in college, and the exchange program had been recently set up in Kanazawa, Japan, in Ishikawa camp, and so they organized homestays for all of the students in my program, and that was the spring of I think that was 1993. So I guess I'm dating myself, but that's all right. But it's a long time now, and I had this wonderful host family, and I have lost touch with them. And I've been thinking about, I have not been back to Ishikawa-ken since the last time that I was there in the 90s. So that's something, if they ever let Americans back into Japan, I think I may, see what I can do about trying to track down that family. But I guess just to go back and have some more background information. So I had started studying Japanese language as a freshman in college here in the United States. And it's a pretty intensive, I went to Dartmouth as an undergrad, and they have a pretty intensive language study program. But, for many languages you would study for, I think it was like 3 semesters. It's not semesters, it's quarters. We were on a quarter system. So it was like the equivalent of one academic year. And then you're like primed, you can go to France or Spain or Italy. And you're sort of equipped. But with Japanese, you had to study 5 quarters. So it was about a year and a half. And still, when they they plunked us down in Tokyo, and we were, clueless, absolutely clueless. Right. So, but then they whisked us up to Ishikawa-ken, and it was a really exciting experience. And like I said, I had this wonderful host family, and the story that you're referencing that I had told, it was like, it was this relatively wealthy family that I was staying with, and they were very reserved and very kind, but they very reserved, and on the last night before we were leaving, the students were leaving, we a number of us went out with my host mother, like took us out, and we were singing karaoke and drinking and the on the way, I guess my host mother had a little too much to drink, and I had never seen her drink that much, it wasn't that long of a homestay, but on the car ride home, she was just like bawling her eyes out. She had just sort of like, she had burst into tears, and it was just like, I remember it in English. She was speaking Japanese, but what she was saying was, like, this is too hard, I can't, it's going to be so difficult to say goodbye. And she was just like, and it really kind of took me aback because I hadn't seen that level of emotional connection prior to that evening. I knew that I was enjoying getting to know her and, the generosity and hospitality that she had shown me, but it was like, it just kind of showed me a different side of, these interactions that, I had up to that point, and then, kind of gave me a window onto the interactions that I would have with the people in Japan who I would ultimately become close with. So yeah.
No, I love that story because it's so easy to just think like Japanese people are like this or that, but there's a lot going on there that we're all human beings, right? Like we all have those same emotions.
Obviously.
So
Right. right? We just demonstrate them differently. So.
Exactly, yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, as I said, I don't know how exactly you're going to edit this, but I guess just sort of as a lead-in to Shiori Ito and her book, there's a connection that just occurred to me in that, I'm a literary translator. I've been translating books for many years, mostly fiction, but in English, I read a lot of memoir. I mean, in this country, memoir is a very popular genre, and I enjoy reading those. And I just for the sort of self-identification, the identification you have with these writers and the experiences that they're sharing with us. And I had been looking for a memoir in Japanese to translate into English for years. And the thing is that the genres don't really match up the same way in Japan. I mean, first of all, I don't think memoir is as popular in the Japanese publishing market. But, what we were talking about in terms of the sort of the omote and the facade and the, what lies underneath in terms of the emotional tenor of these relationships, like it's not supported in the same way by society, so that you can't, in America and in English, people they write these memoirs, they're tell-all, they lay themselves bare, and I don't think that Japanese society really enables people to be as forthcoming about their vulnerabilities.
So is that what stood out, at least in part, about Shiori's memoir? Or, well, I don't know if you would call it a memoir, but her book? Yeah,
I mean, I think it is. I mean, it's nonfiction, and I guess part of it is memoir. I think it's, the fact that she is telling her own story and being extremely frank and candid in the way she's, discussing her experience and her experiences and how they affect her, and I mean, not just since what happened, but also, her childhood and everything that led up to that day that, is the reason why she wrote this book. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, then how about we then discuss the book a bit, because I think this was a very natural lead-in, and we might as well, for anybody that's confused, we might as well let them in on exactly what we're referring to. But could you give a general idea of who Shiori Ito was and what the book deals with?
Yes, sure. So Shiori Ito, she is a journalist, and Black Box is a book that was published in Japan in October of 2017. And it's based upon her experience of sexual assault that occurred in 2015. So I think I have to be careful about alleged assault, and but this is, her account of it. So she was an aspiring journalist. And she was actually studying abroad, studying in New York and in Europe. And she had met a Japanese journalist, very well-known, successful. His name is Noriyuki Yamaguchi. And they met in New York. And he was encouraging her about helping to, saying that he might be able to help her find an internship or find a position as a producer. And they had remained in touch, and they were in contact about trying to find a job for her when they met up in Tokyo in April of 2015. And they were in one place, and they were having things to drink and a little bit of food. And then they went to a sushi bar where they had more to drink and not a whole lot of food. And the last thing that Shiori remembers was passing out in the bathroom of the sushi restaurant. And when she regained consciousness, what her memory is that she was in his room being raped. And his hotel room, I'm sorry, I should clarify.
Yes.
And so she got out of the hotel, out of the room and out of the hotel, and, went home. And then basically every institution that there might be to support a victim of sexual assault failed her in that, trying to go to the doctor, trying to go to a hospital, trying to call a hotline for victims of sexual assault, going to the police, going through the public prosecutor's office. So it's a very, it's a disheartening story, but because of the difficulties that she faced, ultimately she decided to hold a press conference in, I'm not, it's a relatively well-known story, so I'm not going to sort of give all of the blow-by-blows, but in May of 2017, she held a press conference and showed her face. She only used her first name at that time, Shiori, and she sort of talked about what she'd been going through and what was happening with the investigation and the legal process. But she was, she faced intense harassment and, online abuse and things like that. And then she wrote this book, and her book came out, as I said, in October of 2017 is when it was published in Japanese. And that, if you think about what was happening in the United States, that's also when the Harvey Weinstein story broke. And so that also catapulted what the Me Too movement existed prior to that, but it sort of took on a different tenor. It took on a different momentum. And, Me Too sort of catapulted around the world. And because Shiori-san's book had just been published in Japanese, she then became sort of the symbol, the de facto symbol of the movement in Japan. And so, obviously it takes book publishing is slow moving. Yeah. And so this book was only just published this month, July 2021 in English. So,
there's a lot of different things that the book touches on and mentions that I want to, briefly discuss. But as you were talking about earlier, like you were interested in translating this, some kind of memoir. So then how did you then get involved with this project? Was it something that you were aware of? Did somebody bring it to your attention? How did this all come to fruition, I guess?
Yes. So I, as I said, I work as a literary translator. I have worked in book publishing for many years. So I have a lot of contacts in both the American and Japanese publishing worlds. And so the publisher of the Japanese book, I know the people who are sell the rights to foreign publishers there. And so that's sort of how this project specifically, I did know about Shiori's story, and I knew about her book, but I wasn't really aware of what was going on. I wasn't actively going after the book rights, but then it did sort of happen. It kind of, not coincidentally, but it kind of came together in that the publisher reached out to me, and I was interested and wanted to move forward and be involved. And Shiori happened to be in New York. And so we had a chance to meet in person. This was, I think, almost 3 years ago. And that, it's such a personal book. I do often know the author. I know nowadays I often have some kind of contact with the authors whose work I'm translating. But if it's fiction, obviously there's a different level of connection between their work and the person. But, I think for a book like this, it was important to have met her, and it helped me at least to have met her in person and to sort of have a sense of how to translate the book. So so she and I had met in September, and then I think that was September 2018, because I was then preparing sample materials from the book in order to, in English and a summary kind of thing, so that we could, the publisher and the agents and the people involved would submit them to English language editors and publishers to find a home for them. But I remember that I was translating the sample materials while the Kavanaugh hearings were going on in the United States. So that was sort of again, these like reverberations that are going on, it's like this is happening in the moment. And so,
And like one other layer to this, I guess, is that Shiori is a, she spent extensive time in New York, and she's a proficient English speaker. And
right.
So I guess, did she, because when you consult with the writer of, for example, a fiction piece that or a book that you've written, I guess you do check, like, I did it this way sometimes, but you don't have a lot of times the person with that level of proficiency that can take a look at what you've done, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's true. That's true. I haven't, most of the authors that I work with, they don't speak English fluently to sort of review or edit what I'm doing. And I can ask them questions, most of the, usually either ask them in Japanese or ask them about the English specifically. But, and I did that somewhat, some very specific questions. I I tend not to ask the author a lot of questions. That's just my personal, choice. That's my style. But, actually, I know, because we just did the launch event for this book, and Jody mentioned it, that she hasn't read my translation, because this material is too painful to her. Like, she wrote the book. Sure. Yeah. And she doesn't want to read it. Like, she came in 2019, she was invited to a literary festival in New York. It was one that I was involved with, in Pen America's World Voices Festival. And she did a couple of events, and, a lot of people at these events, people were reading from their work, and, she didn't want to read in Japanese or in English. She did not want to read from it. She, I read from her book in English because it was not something that she cares to do.
Yeah. No, understandable.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there's a few things that I was hoping we could, touch on related to, what comes up in the book. But there's this one term that gets used multiple times, and I guess it's a Japanese legal term, but in English the translation is quasi-rape. Well, one, what is it in Japanese, and then two, could you kind of explain what this is? Like, what does that even Shiori mentions it herself, but it's this kind of thing that like doesn't really make sense. Right.
Yes. Well, so it's also in her introduction to the book. She talks about, I think it's in the course of, from when her sexual assault occurred to when the book is published, there's this revision to, I think it's at that point, it's like 110-year-old law that's part of the Japanese Constitution, I think. That, not the Constitution, because that was, but anyway, it's in the legal code, the criminal code. They were redefining what these words meant. So it's Jungo Kanzai is the
Kanzai.
It's Jun, as in like Junbi no Jun.
Right.
And then it's Go is tsuyoi. And Kan is, well, it's like it's the three onna is the character, and Zai for Tsumi. And so that's I actually just plugged it in to look it up, look at into a dictionary. It's it's defined as incapacitated rape, a crime of sexual assault against somebody who is intoxicated, asleep, or otherwise unable to consent or resist.
Right. Like, but that June at the beginning, usually in a lot of other terms, you would hear it used for like semi, or in this case, like how it was translated, quasi,
right?
Yes. Like, something along those lines.
Right. So again, these are, I'm not a lawyer and I don't
Sure.
translate a lot of legal terminology, but so in terms of trying to figure out sort of like, how do you translate that? And so, yeah, these terms are important to determine. And,
Sure.
so, the sort of the distinction between rape and quasi-rape. And, I think, there are distinctions in English and in American law. There are not, there is, there's a difference when it's, again, this is something that Shiori talks about in the introduction to the book, very early in the book, talking about, people think of rape as like a violent, it's always a violent crime, but they think of it as stranger rape. They think of people being attacked on the street. And, that is by far the minority of cases that, where assault occurs.
Yeah. It's just such a peculiar term, whether it's in English or in Japanese, because like I said, that Jun in there colors kind of your interpretation of it. At least it does for me. So it certainly stands out to me as like, it's like, but rape is rape. It's like, it's like, is there really a need? But I don't know, legal terminology, I guess.
And so, but that's what the book really sort of, and I've used this in some of the other interviews that I've done for this, and in the publicity for this, the publication of this book. This book is not. We're talking about whether is this a memoir? What is how would you categorize this book? It is not. If there is such a thing, it is not a rape memoir. I think of it as like a tear down the system manifesto. In that she, because of her journalistic background, she very systematically goes through every step, every stage of this process. And like I said, all of the institutions that sort of support it or don't support it, and points out where the fault lines are, where things fall apart. And, like you've gone right to the heart of it, is like these words, these definitions, from the start. It's sort of like, what are you talking about? Rape is rape. So
yeah. It's like you're incapacitated. It's like, okay, so what? Like it's like, really, like that, we're arguing about that. Like, I don't know, yeah. So speaking of the kind of institutional thing, and there's the title itself, right? Black box, like that is very much related to that. Could you explain what that's referring to?
Yes. So she talks about, she decided to call this her book Black Box because that's what the detectives and the prosecution, the public prosecutors told her. That's how they described her book. Her case, in that because it happened behind closed doors, and there's, it's really he said, she said. Yeah. It was a black box. That's what they called it. I don't know how you want to, you could imagine that however you choose to, but it's kind of disturbing to think of it as this black box. And she describes it, it's like she would try to, as she tries to open the black box, and there's always another one inside of that box. So no, you alluded to it earlier, but it's an extremely well written book. It's engaging for both good and horrifying reasons. The way that she sets it up at the beginning, with her personal background and learning about her childhood, you really, like, if this was a novel, like, I would say I was so invested in the character. But yes. as I go deeper and deeper, it's just like pulling your hair out, and it gets like more and more frustrating. You're going like, oh my God, like, I don't know how obviously this was anything but easy for her, but it's like to have made it through and I don't know, like she comes off as an extremely strong individual, but obviously what she lays out in the book is a lot of frustration and suffering and it's just, it's not an easy book to read, but I think it's a very important book to read, and you learn so much about both her, but also, like you said, kind of the system in general. Right. Yes, I agree. And I think also, I mentioned previously, and I guess your listeners could also look up there, we did a launch event with Books Are Magic for the book, and it's a bookstore in Brooklyn, New York, and her interlocutor for that event was Chanel Miller, who is the author of Know My Name, which is a different memoir, but Chanel Miller is Emily Doe. If if people are familiar with the Stanford rape case, and so reading that book after translating Shiori's book, there are a lot, even though, one takes place in Japan and within the Japanese legal system and one takes place within the American legal system, and they had very different outcomes. What's similar about, and this is what the two of them talked about at that event, is that it's very important for them to show their vulnerability, to say, yes, of course, these are very strong women. They've been through a devastating experience and they are survivors, but survivorhood is not, there is no one way to be a survivor. And it's important to they were both talking about how it's important to them to make it clear that they still struggle.
Yeah. No, that Shiori seems, at least from, and obviously never met her, never talked to her, but what I can tell from the book is it seems completely honest. And, yes, she lays it out in a very systematic way, but she also along the way, points out, I shouldn't have done it this way. I should have, I wish I would have done it this way. I wish I would have immediately done this or that. And so, I can kind of, I think it comes across in the piece that she is kind of dealing with her own mistakes in how she treated some of this as well.
But that, a lot of the mistakes that she made were perfectly, they're human mistakes.
Yes, nobody, what do you do in that sort of situations? Sadly, I think most people don't know until after it's already happened and it's in a way too late, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on the idea of she mentions statistics and how Japan kind of compares to other countries in terms of sexual assault and reportings, and on the surface it seems like Japan is lower, but could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, what she talks about is that she talks about there's the statistics, but then you have to analyze the statistics and the fact that the rate of reporting, I think, is 4% or something. As much as you can even evaluate something like that, but the rate of reporting of sexual assault is so low in Japan. And so that colors the way that it's categorized and the way that it's way that it's accounted for. And I think in that part of the book where she is looking at those statistics, I think it's Sweden that has the highest.
So, yeah.
Sweden has the highest number of rape and sexual assault cases, but it's also because of the way that they account for it. It's not just if you have someone who was being abused, they count every instance of abuse as opposed to just, one person's reporting or one person's report, I should say. And so, it is definitely sort of categorizing apples and oranges. And so, not to, to belittle what we're talking about, but yeah, it's very difficult to analyze this material. And so, as she talks about in the book, it's so, for anywhere, even in the United States, it's where we think that we have ways of, we think we've improved ways of dealing with it. It's still, it's very difficult for the victim of sexual assault to come forward and to prosecute and, to press charges. And, so few of the cases actually end in justice. So.
Yeah. Could you, I don't know, point out just a few of the issues that she describes, having run into, during, this whole ordeal, any of the, there's quite a few, but just a few examples of some of the problems that she ran into, with the system as a whole?
Yeah, where
do we start, right? Yeah, I know.
Well, I think one of the most disturbing things early on is the way that she was asked by the police to reenact her assault.
Yeah.
And I guess most police departments have like a dojo within the premises, and so they went there. They brought her into the dojo and like a gymnasium, and she's like surrounded by all of these officers, and I think all the other people present are men, and they had a life-size doll, and they asked her to recreate, what her assault was, and it was sort of like, and they were taking pictures. So it was like, was it like this? Is this how he was lying? Is this how you were lying? And that was described as a second rape. So that's extremely disturbing and upsetting.
And I think I don't know how can I put it? This was already after having, she had already done the declaration like multiple times by this point, right? It wasn't like they even needed that information.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But so, the real, the added part of Shiori's story is that the person she accused of sexual assault, of raping her, he is, as I said, he's a well-known journalist, and he has written 2 authorized biographies of Shinzo Abe, who was, until very recently, the Prime Minister of Japan. So we know that he is very powerful and powerfully connected. And so, when she goes to the police, the detective who she's working with is like, these things happen all the time. They're very difficult to yes, they're terrible, but it's very difficult to prosecute or to investigate and to prosecute. But what happens is that they actually had the security camera footage of her being dragged out of the taxi at his hotel and dragged through the lobby. And there was testimony from from the taxi driver who said she repeatedly asked to be taken to the train station, but he didn't. They still went to Yamaguchi-san's hotel. And so with this testimony and this security footage, they were able to get an arrest warrant. And Yamaguchi-san was set to be arrested at Narita Airport because he was the Washington bureau chief for Tokyo Broadcasting Company at the time. And they were going to arrest him in the airport. And at the very last moment, a stop order came down from on high within the police department and within MPD. And so, that's also just like, okay, there are ways that some people are prosecuted and or investigated, and the way that other people, people of power, people of status, they're treated differently. And so that's another upsetting aspect of her case.
Yeah, and not being able to like get the answers that I think at least because she was, I think it was her uncle was a lawyer, right? And so he was kind of giving her some general advice. It's like, normally this is not how things are done, right? So, but I mean, one of the scenes that stands out to me, aside from, the ones that you've already laid out, but the police kind of taking her to this lawyer that seems to be kind of like pushing her to settle.
Right.
I mean, we don't know like if there was some sort of like actual kind of behind the scenes talkings, like push her to do this, but everything, the details surrounding that meeting really seem to suggest that quite strongly, right? Where it's kind of like, all right, let's just drop the case, just settle, just forget it. And it was just so uncomfortable just reading about that.
Yes. This was a very difficult book to translate. It was traumatizing. I mean, I wouldn't compare my trauma of translating it to anything close to what Shiori experiences, but it's not an easy book to translate. It's not an easy book to read.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could. You already towards the beginning, we talked a little bit about this, but could you tell us a little bit about kind of some of the impact that Shiori's story has had? I mean, like Shiori herself kind of addresses this, especially in the last section of the book. She has become this well-known figure, and recognized that, I think, was it People magazine or was it Time magazine? Time magazine, right?
Time. It's Time.
Yes,
yeah.
Time, one of the most influential people. But even she herself has like kind of some mixed feelings about that. And so I don't know if you could give us like a little bit of insight into like how things have gone since, and, how she sees things.
Well, I mean, I think, what we see from the book is how she is very dedicated to whatever it is that she's doing. And so, even before what happened to her, she was, really focused on becoming a journalist and how she was going to go about doing that. And so this tragedy, this trauma happens to her, but she sort of, she's the same, and she's still the same person after. And so she just sort of applies the same character traits, these, her endurance and her strength and her focus to, investigating it and not making some good about it, but what she's, her book is, it's for the next victim. She doesn't want what happened to her to happen to, or, what she experienced after the assault to happen to her sister, to happen to her sister's friends, to happen to, anybody else. So she is trying to educate people about where, yes, like you said, the things that you shouldn't do, the things that she did wrong, but yes, then to change the system. So, she has become this figure, this symbol, and I guess her ambivalence about that is, she's just, just this one person, but at the same time, it's like she can't go back and change what happened to her. And since then, she just has to, like, this terrible thing happened to her, but then afterward, she's gotten to meet all kinds of amazing people after that. And she's gotten to, help to increase awareness and hopefully to enact change for victims. So,
this terrible thing happened to her, but I think what has made her story so, I guess, powerful, or what has attracted people to her is the way that she has ultimately tried to deal with it, I guess, right? And bring it to light. So, I mean,
like I said, it's not just about what happened to her. It's the way that she, she's so sort of, like I said, meticulously goes through, examines that this is something that happens, and it happens to, far too many people.
Of course, there is so much more to the story that we couldn't cover. And even if we could cover it all, I don't think it's the same as reading it in the way that Shiori actually wrote it. There's so much more there. So I do highly recommend the book. Again, there's an Amazon affiliate link in the show notes, japanq.com/Amazon as well. Works for anything you're going to purchase on Amazon. But no need to use that. If you want to support the book, then just go pick it up wherever you can find it. Black Box, the story that sparked Japan's Me Too movement is the title, written by Shiori Ito and translated by Allison Markin Powell. Don't forget that Allison is coming back for a follow-up to this episode. It's going to be the next one that I release. And in that one, we're going to have a fun conversation about translating Japanese fiction. Translation, language, words, all stuff I absolutely love. It's a fun conversation. Come back for that. If you have any questions or comments, send them over to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. Don't forget to follow on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook has been blowing up lately. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people have been following over there. So thank you if you're one of those individuals. Don't forget to follow on Twitter as well. Plenty going on over there. I post quite a bit there. And remember to rate and review and tell a friend about the show. Recommend it to people if you enjoy what I'm doing. I would greatly appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button too so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you to You Know Me for providing the opening and closing song. That does it for this episode. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of Ichimon Japan. That one focuses on the movie Your Name, right? Kimi no Nawa, very, very popular movie that came out a few years ago. So if you want to listen to me and my co-host talk about that and discuss some of the themes and things that I found out about the movie, then go check it out. Ichimon Japan episode 49, I believe. I'm just going off the top of my head, but again, link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!